Welcome to Nice Ashes. I'm Mike.
And I'm Nate. This is season 3 of Nice Ashes. You excited, Mike?
I am. It was, so anticipated globally.
I know. I was getting messages from like Eminem and T Swift and Obama and, all these people.
Was it real T Swift or was it AI T Swift?
I think that might be an upcoming episode in season 3, but no spoilers, everyone. We do have some new things in season 3. We have a brand new logo. We've got a website, niceashespodcast.com. And we've got a Patreon with some sweet perks, patreon.com/niceashes. So you can go there, check it out. We're not going to waste a whole lot of time trying to whore ourselves out for money or anything like that. But if you give us a like, a listen, a follow, toss a couple bucks our way every month, we're super appreciative. If not, that's okay. We're still going to keep streaming and podcasting for your listening enjoyment.
Yes.
What are we smoking, Mike?
So, with the theme this year is going to be super cheap cigars that people can buy in bulk, I think, for the most part. We have probably 50 cigars in the bag for the show, so maybe we'll mix it up. For special occasions, I think we are. But
yeah, we'll have to see. The other interesting thing, Mike, real quick, sorry to cut you off, as I often do on these episodes, is this season we will be hitting our 100th episode. So expect maybe a nicer cigar for that episode. We'll see. No spoilers.
We'll see. Yes.
As you were saying, Mike.
So we are going to be smoking a Drew Estates Factory Smokes. And this particular one is a Shade Toro. We have other factory smokes. I think I got one of each kind. So
yeah, I saw quite a few of them in my show humidor as I was trying to find this one frantically before we started recording this episode. I saw a Maduro. I saw a sweet something. And then I diverted my eyes away from my computer screen and back into the humidor, and there was another factory smoke there. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I think there's probably 4, maybe 5 of these that you have picked out for us this season.
I cannot recall off the top of my head. I will not tell a lie.
Hey,
there's at least
that
3.
Is A-okay.
Yeah, there's at least 2 for sure.
Yes, I think there's at least 4. We might have some duplicates just in case. You never know. We get a guest. Or 2. We'll see. We'll see what the season has in store for us. But this, our first episode, I wanted to tell you before we got into our main topic, Mike. Over Christmas, I got a drone. And it's not one of those little drones that you see flying around. It's actually one of those unmanned aerial assault drones. And so I launched it and flew it today. And I bunker busted some of those Taliban cocksuckers that Toby Keith has his boot in their ass. So I'm just kidding. That's not, no, it's a little DJI drone, but it was fun. And I thought, hey, what better way to do a lead in to our topic this episode than to harken back to the Toby Keith, put a boot in their ass, whatever that song is called. This was like right before he got into the Red Solo Cup and trailer park trash country level of songs.
Yes. I think it is post I Love This Bar and pre Red Solo Cup.
Yep.
Yes. I have a love-hate relationship with Toby Keith, so there we go.
He's got some really good songs, like older songs, are really good. And then he gets and of course I haven't listened to any country for the past maybe 5 to 10 years, I suppose, but
unfortunately I listen to country every week at the bowling alley. Not by choice.
Well, there you go. Cash in your chips, ladies and gentlemen. Mike has made it a whole 5 minutes into season 3 before bringing up bowling. This could be a fun drinking game. I think we should refine this. And
I was going to say, for those of you with the drinking board on the wall, you can cross that one off your list.
Yes, you're one step closer to bingo. Speaking of drinking, Mike, what are you drinking with your Shade Factory Smoke?
I have a glass of water.
So far... Okay.
And Guinness. Yes.
Good. So far, I'm liking the Factory Smokes. At least this Shade. It is a little sweet. I am drinking a Toppling Goliath Pompeii India Pale Ale. It's a mosaic hopped India Pale Ale. I don't think I've ever had this before, but I was cruising around today, as I often do. That's a lie. I usually go weeks at a time without leaving the house because I work from home. And I thought I need to get myself a little special beverage to go with the launch of season 3 tonight, and this is what I picked. So this is out of Decorah, Iowa. So I guess you could say good things do come out of Iowa every once in a while. But they also do the Psycho Sue. If you've been to the Field Museum in Chicago to see the natural history, they've got Sue the Tyrannosaurus Rex. They have a special brew dedicated to those fossils. So that is the story behind that as far as I know. And if you want to fact check me, that's your prerogative.
Yes. Well, something that happened in Iowa recently was they had the Iowa caucus, right? Which I'm guessing you're referring to. Interestingly enough, Rick DeSantis, he dropped out after the Iowa caucus, and he is related to the book that we are going to review today. Because he was a torturer at Guantanamo.
There we go.
He's one of the lawyers that defended the torturers that were discussed in the book.
Yes. I feel there are a lot of people related to the book that would rather not be related to the book. But for those of you that are astute and listening, episode 1 of season 3 is a book review.
Yes.
And we are reviewing, it's an older book, Mike, right? It's like 2007, 8-ish, maybe 10-ish?
Yes, it's pre-Obama era. I believe it's 07.
Okay.
Yeah, it's present.
I know in the conclusion
era.
She was mentioning things that happened in 2007, so that's why I feel like it was probably written pre-Obama, but maybe it was actually published and released concurrent with Obama or something. Not that wasn't a tie-in or anything. It was just the way of things working.
It was published in 2007. So
okay, there we go.
Yes.
But the book we're talking about. Yes, go ahead, Mike. Go
ahead, Nate. Go ahead.
Oh, I just get excited. I've got a little bit new recording setup here. I get excited because whatever, why not? The book is called The Shock Doctrine. The subtitle is something, 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 disaster capitalism, something, something, something. And the author is Naomi Klein.
Yes. So
this is a book that's been out for 17 years, Mike, right? If I'm doing my math correctly.
Yeah, I guess so. 17 years. It's somewhere in there, 16 to 17 years.
Yes. How do you want to start? How do you want to approach this book? How do you want to start looking at this?
I mean, we could do it in sequential order, or we could just talk about the concept that's put forth.
Let's start with the concept, and then we'll kind of delve into some of the, it doesn't necessarily have to be sequential, but some of the broader themes that's discussed in the book, and maybe some of the themes we picked up while reading it.
Okay.
Does that sound good?
That sounds good to me.
All right. Let's shock and awe, y'all.
Yes. The concept behind the shock doctrine, and it is talked about in both a psychological and an economic sense, is that you cause severe damage, or when severe damage is done, you clear out old space, and then you have this void. And in the void, you can replace it with whatever you want. So in the economic sense, it would be extreme devastation, either of an economic or of a physical kind. And then you use that opportunity of rebuilding to replace old government systems with fascist systems. She never specifically says the word fascism.
No, that's true. She uses neoliberal, neoconservative.
Yes.
And she has an axe to grind with the Chicago School of Economics and Friedman specifically.
It is largely a book about Milton Friedman and his economic theories, which are, this all ties in with Operation Paperclip and the Nazification of the institutions in America that happened after the Second World War, and the acceptance of fascism in our government. Because, like I say, she never outright says fascism, but she's describing exactly what fascism is. So
yes. And the point to make clear is that Milton Friedman and the, Chicago School of Economics, what have you, proposes laissez-faire capitalism, which is what they call it. But in reality, the laissez-faire capitalism or the free markets that they're proposing is basically just corporatism and opening up these kind of closed economies to be bought up and profited upon by well-established and wealthy corporations that otherwise wouldn't have had a way to get a foothold in the door.
Right. So I'm going to add in that while the Chicago School and Milton Friedman support quote unquote laissez-faire economics and small government, they do support massive spending on a police state and military spending to back up the laissez-faire capitalism when people revolt against the government and against the corporations. Because they don't believe
mostly
in free
against
speech,
the corporations.
and they don't believe in resistance to the laissez-faire capitalism, right?
Yeah,
So,
and I guess to distill it even further, or to peel back the layers of Shrek's onion, as it were, the free market that they're proposing is that every asset of the government should be run by a private corporation. And it should not be unionized. It should not be nationalized. It should not be any of those things. It should be run by a private corporation. You know, outsourcing government is the end goal, I guess. From what I gathered.
Ultimately, they want to outsource all government, including the people who make the decisions. Like, they don't particularly believe in voting or democracy.
Yeah. But hey, that's free market, right?
Right. Right. They believe in that. Well, to me, it's shorthand for economic exploitation of the poor by the ultra wealthy.
Yes. And there's chapter after chapter of how the poor suffer.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a good summation, I guess, or, you know, like intro to what this book is about. I found it very, I remember you texted me something and I was like, man, it's brutal. And it's not a happy, uplifting book. You know, see, I don't know if I should mention. Go ahead.
Oh, Mike. Go ahead. Okay. Well, I didn't know, because I know about Milton Friedman, and I studied government and politics in college. And I actually took a course on bureaucracy and the theories of the Chicago School about bureaucracy and things of that nature. But what wasn't covered, and I did not know when I learned from this book, was that Milton Friedman's parents were sweatshop owners who were shut down by the New Deal policies of the Democratic Party. And she didn't explore it, but to me, I got the same feeling about him as I got from Ayn Rand, where he had a personal vendetta because he could have been a master of slaves and the government stole his slave force away. So he had the end goal in his brain, and then he made excuses up to get to his end position, which was, I want to own people again, like my parents did.
Yes. Well, and maybe it's not even owning people, but he wants to own all profits for all time, you know, because the goal of owning people, I don't know. I mean, I've not owned anyone, so that's not I don't know. I'm just saying the reason people enjoyed slavery was because of the massive profits. You didn't have to pay them and you got extra profits. So I don't know that owning people is kind of his ultimate goal. I think it's the unfettered profits, the untaxable profits, the paying your working force as little as absolutely possible.
Yeah, that's a good criticism of what I said, because it's not about the power of owning the people. It's about the power of not paying them and taking everything and putting nothing back into the system. Right.
Yes.
Like in the utopian laissez-faire world, you just dump the sewage onto the street and your unpaid workforce, you know, just lives on the street or whatever, or never leaves the factory and never sleeps, or they get locked in.
Yeah. Whatever they do, you don't
die.
care because you're making these crazy profits. So who cares what they're doing?
Right. That's why communist China has been such a stunning success for big business, because they don't care what the workforce conditions are like as long as they maximize profit. So
yes, I guess maybe because we've reviewed a couple other books that are very similar in looking at the inner workings of, let's just say, politics in general and not specifically United States politics, because I believe Naomi Klein is a Canadian, and so, of course, she has maybe a somewhat vested interest in what America does, though she does call out what in some chapters she calls out Canada for doing, whatever Canada did. And, South America is kind of a big focus of the book. A lot of that stuff was in, I believe, the 80s or late 70s, 80s. And there's a little bit of crossover here with this book. And the crossovers with Confessions of an Economic Hitman, where he's talking about going in and, removing fatally forcibly, some of these leaders of foreign countries if they don't want to play ball with the United States and the World Bank and that sort of thing. And then there's also a little bit of overlap with The Real Anthony Fauci by RFK Jr., because she does talk a little bit about some of the same players that he talks about and some of the same stuff, so it's all kind of in that same realm. I recently told someone that if you want to, and this isn't saying these books are all 100% true. There's definitely criticisms on all of these books out there, right? You can go and I think towards the end, Mike will talk about if you got a chance to read that article I sent you.
I didn't because I took the time.
About shock doctrine? Okay.
I took the time to read The Battle for Paradise, which was an extension of the shock doctrine solely about the 2018 crisis in Puerto Rico. So I can talk about that.
Okay. Sure. And I can talk about the little PDF, little article, kind of rebuttal. I did find all the negative stuff, really, like the super negative stuff about the shock doctrine I found was hosted on the Cato Institute's website.
Yeah, which is a fascist organization.
Do you know who's behind the Cato Institute?
Karl Rove? No, tell me who.
The Koch brothers.
Oh, the Koch brothers. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, the quote-unquote libertarians.
Of course they would hate the shock doctrine because they are profiting from all the stuff she's talking about.
The war pigs don't like that she's calling out their exploitation of the four horsemen of the apocalypse.
Yeah. Yes. So I guess in broad strokes, Mike, I'm going to kind of go through the broad strokes of the book. And then because of your interest in history and details and things of that nature, you can interject or fill in some of the gaps at the end of my little ramble here. But
Absolutely.
In the broad strokes, it is mostly, I think it kind of starts out in South America where you've got these leaders who want autonomy and they don't really want to be beholden to the United States or any outside forces. I mean, these are places that have been colonized by Great Britain and France and, European powers and United States and so they've been kind of like in the scrap. And there are these events that cause shocks in the country. And there were also, and maybe this goes into our Manson episode, but there are also CIA notes and things on shock therapy treatment where they're trying to literally shock the personality and memories out of somebody using electroshock therapy to be able to have a blank slate to work upon mentally within an individual. And so you've got these corporatist, fascist, quasi-capitalist, free market touting people that kind of start seeing these shocks, and maybe they've been exposed to the CIA manuals or whatnot, and they say these people are in shock. They can't make rational decisions. We can circumvent the legal system of that country and institute stuff that's friendly to not United States necessarily. Of course, it's beneficial to the United States, but more importantly, stuff that is beneficial to corporations that happen to be based in the United States.
Yes.
So far, so good.
I would like to add that the book starts with a discussion of, I don't think she used the term, but MK Ultra and the CIA's use of drugs and experimentation and learning about what they do, which...
Yes, because that woman finally got her medical records from that program and was astounded because she had no idea what was done to her.
Yes, which MK Ultra was very influential with the CIA's information gathering techniques, let's say. And then they moved into Pinochet's Chile, and they expanded their knowledge of how to use drugs to torture people even more, which rolled into our use of them in the War on Terror. So it's all kind of related through the chain of events, not necessarily the exact same actors.
No, but also like the sensory deprivation and things like that. And so basically the book kind of starts out as these capitalists, well, let's just call them corporatists, because that's really what they are, that want the corporations to have the ultimate power at the end of the day. These corporatists start out being opportunistic, right? So they see an overthrow of something or an economy collapsing or something, and then they get ready and they go down there, they prime the well, and when all the citizens and the government are at their most confused, their most shocked state, that's when they go in and start instituting all these economic programs to pull them out of this crisis they've gotten themselves into. And by the end of the book, these corporatists, because it's a progression of 30, 40 years, she never says they're actually fabricating these events, which I thought she was going to when she was talking about 9/11, but she didn't go that far, right? She basically said that they were not just watching, but they were kind of like with some stock market manipulation of some of these other countries' economies, or the reason that we chose to invade Iran or Iraq, I can't even remember now. We've been everywhere, right? But after Afghanistan, the next place we invaded was chosen solely on economic principles, not really strategic military tactical strike type of thing, you know?
Well, we also have the benefit of 17 years of leaks and documents.
You know, that's also true, but I feel like she's pretty vindicated in a lot of what she was talking about in the book.
She's been vindicated, and what I was going to add is that we now, a 24, know that, for example, the Bush administration had information that September 11th was going to happen, and they did not attempt to stop it. Just like we now know, because it was leaked, that Israel knew about the attacks on October 7th, and they did nothing to stop it. They allowed it to happen. It's not that the U.S. government did the attack, but they didn't stop it from happening when they had the information that could have allowed them to stop it, if you know what I mean.
Yes,
right?
or could
they
have mitigated
the
the death toll or something.
Right. And she didn't talk about in the book, like in Israel, there's a very similar thing going on that happened in Russia, that happened even in the Western United States when we had territorial expansion, right? So there's a long history of this sort of setting up the situation and allowing it to happen naturally, and then coming in behind that and exploiting the victims, basically.
Yes. Mike, I think I'm about halfway done with this thing.
Oh, I'm not quite halfway.
Okay.
But I'm almost halfway.
Should we just do it? Let's do a stick check then.
Mm-hmm. It's good. It's surprisingly sweet.
It's good. It's surprisingly sweet. It's not I wouldn't call it overly sweet though.
Mm-mm.
The first, I guess, like the first maybe 2 inches was pretty sweet. I feel like the sweetness is kind of mellowed out a little bit here halfway through.
Okay.
But it could also be I'm pairing it with a kind of like a mosaic hopped IPA. So I think it's kind of a good combo.
Sure. And I've mostly been drinking my water and not the Guinness.
Yeah. I actually like this one. I was a little concerned when it had shade on it because I had PTSD flashbacks to the Underground Shade.
I believe the exact quote of mine was, it's a Drew Estates, and it's a factory smoke, and it has their name on a label. So it's a 60-40 chance.
Yes. Whereas the Underground didn't have the name on the label. We had to look it up.
Right. And this is a bin cigar. You can get like 20 of these for $40, I think, online fairly regularly. So
yeah,
very reasonable to stock the humidor with these.
Yes.
If you wanted to.
Yes. I guess I wanted to say also that I was kind of thinking back to our discussion on Confessions of an Economic Hitman, because we both did the revised and expanded edition, where he was telling us, how do you fight against this? And it was something like use paper bags instead of plastic bags, or don't shop at these places, but everything's owned by the same companies now. And it's kind of, and I was apprehensive for a little bit there because she was talking pretty heavily about, as climate change keeps progressing, these things will become more and more normal or routine, or they'll happen more frequently, right? These shocks. And she mentioned that very briefly. And then in the conclusion, she was talking about how like the shock wears off and people will fight back against the shock. And once you've been through the shock, you know how to see the shock coming, I guess, in a way. And I was thinking about, because she was saying, the next, with the climate change and everything, the disaster is going to happen more frequently and there'll be more opportunities to take care of the shock. And she never really mentioned anything about pandemics. I mean, she was talking about the avian flu a bit and stockpiling of that.
She did
vaccine.
do a novella about a crisis that occurred in 2020. And the potential manipulation that could have happened as a result of that.
But she left the book with that these people who are making money off of all this, well, not really people, these corporate people, right? Corporatist entities that are now viewed as people under United States law will become more and more, I don't know if cunning is the right word, but they'll find new ways to make money off of other people's pain and misery, because there's no business like misery business, I guess. And, I don't know that there's anybody, RFK Jr. included, that could have foreseen the coronavirus, coming.
Oh, they did. They game theoried around a coronavirus before it ever happened, right? That's why they were researching it in a lab. You know what I mean? Like the people in control.
No, I understand. I understand exactly what you mean. I'm trying to be very careful with my words here.
Yes.
I just mean none of the general public, right, knew that there was a big pandemic coming. Certainly people might have planned for one, whatever it might have been. But I feel, yes.
We're very cautious at the beginning. I distinctly remember that I turned before you did, because we were both initially very cautious.
Yes.
And that caution turned eventually into a more radical stance that we are not allowed to talk about.
Yes.
And I distinctly remember that for about 2 or 3 months, I had turned before you did, and then something happened in your world, and I don't remember what it was, legitimately. I don't. Yeah. I can't remember, but I know something happened.
I don't know if I remember. Oh, no, I remember what it was. I remember what it was.
Okay. But I don't. But
I think the point is that Mike was maybe, let's just say, a little less cautious than I was, because I had small children at home.
Yes.
And at that time, there was no vaccine for small children. And pretty much when I became, let's not use words that could be clipped and used against me in a court of law. When I joined Mike's side of the debate from a certain point of view, right, then it was pretty much after the vaccine was made available to everybody, not just the elderly and sick or whatever, right? And then I thought, well, everybody who wanted to be vaccinated is vaccinated, and I'm kind of done with this mask thing. And that was my philosophy in life.
Yes. Back to the book. I did get the feeling that she was partisan against Republicans, because she didn't bash the Clintons, even though the Clintons were the ones who were in charge during the disaster that happened in Russia.
Yes, she did bash the Clintons a bit. It was, I mean, she, I guess I would call it, she made an effort to be nonpartisan, like a very small effort. Because I remember her mentioning the Clintons, and they were being mentioned in a bad way. And basically, she was kind of saying everybody from Nixon onward was bad. But she didn't spend a lot of time on the Clintons. But I did notice at least in the conclusion, and maybe in one of the preceding chapters, she was talking about the Christian right-wingers who love George W. Bush, and how they were hoping for the rapture so they wouldn't have to atone for any of their sins. And I thought that was a little bit odd for a book that's trying to be, factual or something.
Right. I just wanted to mention that because to me it was glaring.
Yes.
Because these people that she's mentioning, like the Donald Rumsfelds and the Dick Cheneys and George Bush Sr. and George Bush Jr.
Yeah.
All of these people have been in every government administration since the Nixon era, right? These guys have been in charge of either the government or the corporations that are getting contracts with the government.
Yeah, and when they're done with the government, they go back to the corporations.
Yeah, and then when they're done, they cycle in and out. And it reminded me of a quote by George Carlin, and I'm going to read it. And I think that this is I love George. This is a great quote. And I'm sure that everybody's heard it, but I'm going to read it anyway because it's true. You don't need a formal conspiracy when interests converge. These people went to the same universities and fraternities. They're on the same boards of directors. They're in the same country clubs. They have like interests. They don't need to call a meeting. They know what is good for them, and they're getting it. And then he describes, basically what's happening after that. But that's true, right? Like these people, Donald Rumsfeld knows personally all of the politicians and business leaders on both sides. Donald Rumsfeld is fortunately dead now.
Yeah.
But like George Bush Sr. was the head of the CIA when Pinochet was in charge. So he was the one that was ultimately in charge of giving all the torture techniques they used there, which were then used later on by the United States, right? So like even the former president of the United States is tied in with MK Ultra and torture programs and the shock doctrine, right? Everybody is there in there.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of the whole point. And all of these things that she's talking about in this book from 17 years ago, have by and large been proven true. To some extent, maybe not exactly as she says in the book, but they've, look at the egg shortage from a year, 2 years ago. Well, there was no egg shortage, and all the egg manufacturers were profiting 700% off of the increase in prices. And we're getting to the point now in the economy where they don't have to shock us. We're in a continual state of, PTSD or something, you know what I mean? With the inflation running rampant and the loans and things and the interest on the loans. And the Fed is like, we're going to stop the next economic downturn by just jacking the interest rate up as far as we can. And who's that hurting? It's not hurting the wealthy people. It's not hurting the corporations. They're making money off of that shit. It's only hurting
the interest rate
everybody else.
Being raised to stop inflation because inflation hurts rich people. Their stockpile of money becomes worth less. So they want to control inflation so that the ultra wealthy don't lose assets, right?
That's what I'm saying is it's proof in the pudding.
Absolutely. Sarah and I, Friday, we went to Bemidji for a candlelight walk. And
romantic.
It was very nice, right? Very nice. And then we stopped by the brewery there. We got 2 6-packs of beer and a 4-pack, and it cost us $50.
Yeah,
for
man.
2 6-packs and a 4-pack directly at the brewery. That's crazy.
With no
talk.
Distribution, no anything.
Right.
It was crazy talk. You go to any brewery down in the Minneapolis, St. Paul area here, and the beer starts at $8 for a drink. And
that's wild.
You're like, damn, dude. And in my hometown in Wisconsin, you go in there, you get a pitcher of beer for $3, and it's the microbrew that you can only get in Wisconsin, and you can get it for $3. That's like 4 beers for $3.
Right.
And but they're taking advantage of obviously the cost of living is higher in a major metropolitan area. Like that makes sense. Fine, whatever. But $8 a beer, come on.
That's crazy. The price of everything has gone up. One of the places I routinely go to 2 years ago was $2.50 for a bottle of beer, and now it's $3.50. But it's still the cheapest place in the area to get a bottle of beer.
Yeah, but I mean, to bring it back to the book, like they don't need to have these events to shock us. They just slowly increase the price of everything. And I'm sure you've heard the term shrinkflation, where companies will just fill a product less full than previously and charge the same price.
Yep.
So you're still losing money as the consumer, as the individual.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like, I know a lot of people have been getting big raises through contracts, but it's still not as much as the inflation rate. Like, we're still going down every year.
We're sliding backward every year.
So, and I don't know. I would feel terrible if I had to go get a new car loan right now. I talked to somebody who had to buy a new car, and I think it was 6% interest rate.
Okay.
Which when I bought
even
my
a
truck
home
in
loan
15,
now.
it was zero, right?
Yeah.
So what were you saying about
But
home loans?
Well, I was just saying home loans have gone way up, the interest rate on those.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, I think I saw something where it was like at 7% or 7.7% interest on a home loan of like a $350,000 house or something. It ends up being almost $1.5 million, all said and done.
Yeah, my cousin sent out something like that to the group. And it's like the difference between a 3% loan and a 7% loan is like $500,000 over the lifetime of the loan, which is insanity, you know?
Yeah, because like the home's not ever going to be appraised at $1.5 million. You know what I mean? I mean, maybe it will, but at that point, like the home you want to move into is going to be $2 million or $3 million, you know?
Yep. I had a friend during the boom who got an offer for his house for $500,000 and they bought it for $99,000, you know, a couple of years before.
Yeah.
And his wife wanted to take it and he had to talk her out of it. He's like, well, first of all, we know all of our neighbors and we like living here. Second of all, we have a loan that's only $100,000. When we get $500,000 for this, we're going to have to buy a $500,000 house and have a $500,000 loan, you know, or whatever, right? Like we're not going to come out ahead no matter, unless we leave this area entirely. We are not getting ahead. But she was like, why don't we just move to Bismarck then? And she didn't want to leave, you know, for her own personal reasons. But it's like, the only way that makes sense is if you leave. I would like to say that she talked about Hurricane Katrina and New Orleans. And
yes, that is very interesting to me.
Still, New Orleans to this day is still a disaster, right? It has not recovered. And I didn't know, she went into detail in the book about how the federal government made it impossible for the city to use loans from the government or government funds, like federal government funds, to pay their own city workers. So they forced them into hiring contractors and they had to lay off their own employees. And of course, a lot of times, and not always, contractors are not going to be as efficient as your city worker because they have a profit motive. And that's just
they
the
have
nature.
A profit motive. And she was also talking about how the contractors don't live there, so they don't really care. You know, if you hire someone local to rebuild the road that everybody drives on, they're going to do maybe a little bit better job because they're going to actually be driving on it.
Right.
And a contractor doesn't care. Like once it's done, and they're out going to the next place.
This is related, and this is for the theoretical listener who is vehemently in support of free trade. But I would like to point out that every developed economy got there by trade protectionism until they had enough manufacturing base and economic levels to where they could compete with foreign companies. So Japan is the only example we have in modern history where a feudal age level economy went from a feudal economy in 1868 to by 1900, they were a fully developed modern industrialized nation, right? So in a span of 30 years, they went from a feudal society with no firearms to being a premier military with one of the best, industrialized economies on the planet. And the way they did that is they heavily invested and imported a ton of machinery, but they banned Western companies from operating inside of the country, right? Yeah. So like Seiko.
Yeah, they went isolationist.
They went isolationist. They imported the necessary things they had to, and they got experts to come in and help, but they would not allow foreign companies to operate inside of their territory. Yeah. And they allowed it.
And they developed the Kanban system.
What's that?
It's a system of manufacturing, but they also use it now in sales organizations and things where you want to see the steps and progress of it could be anything. A lot of the CRMs and stuff like Salesforce and stuff has a Kanban view where you can look and see what stage every deal is that you're working on, whether it's a real estate deal or a big contract or whatever, what have you. But they broke these things down, and so it was kind of the manufacturing wasn't the kind of mass production of, let's say, Ford, Henry Ford and the assembly line. It was when demand hit, they had enough parts pre-built to then fill that demand as that demand happened.
Sure.
I mean, that's just a surface level Kanban. We're not talking about Kanban really here, but.
Right. And she didn't cover Japan, but I just want to mention it.
Yeah, I did want to say that reminded me of the section in the book where she was talking about the Marshall Plan.
Yes.
And the differences between the Marshall Plan, which was post-World War II, right?
It was post-World War II rebuilding of Western Europe.
Okay. Yeah, rebuilding. By and large, Germany, they wanted to...
Oh, it wasn't just Germany. It was France.
I know it wasn't just Germany. It was... But, for most Americans, let's just say Germany. No, I'm just kidding. But it was, basically it was rebuilding after World War II, the losing countries, or the countries that lost the most, right? Because it's not a competition, really. It's war. Everybody's a winner. You get a participation trophy, and so on and so forth. But the goal of the Marshall Plan wasn't to maximize corporate profits. It was to get the countries economically stable.
They wanted Western Europe to be stable so that they did not willingly become part of the Soviet Union, because countries at that time were willingly becoming part of the Soviet Union.
Yeah. And the point was that the Marshall Plan strictly prohibited foreign companies from participating for, I don't know, a set number of years or something. Like there was some kind of protocol that the foreign companies couldn't. Basically, these economies and companies were kind of restarting from scratch. So the people who wrote the Marshall Plan thought that a company that was already established, making tons of money, would go in and would basically wipe these other companies off the face of the country because they had no capital. They were trying to start up. So if you're trying to do a search engine startup, you're not going to be able to compete against Google because they're already established. You know what I mean?
Right. The idea was that they had bombed the shit out of Western Europe, both the Americans and the Germans, and they wanted Western Europe to be rebuilt. So the Americans provided all the money and a lot of the material, and they had European companies and workers do all of the work so that they had multiple layers of success, and it was all within the European sphere. So like a French company was going to build the French road, and then all the French workers were going to do the work. They weren't going to import foreign labor, so that all the workers had jobs and money, and then they gained experience so that when the Marshall Plan money ended, now you have a company that knows how to build roads in France, and they can continue to just build roads or build buildings or do other infrastructure. They're not importing American linemen to come in and put power lines in. They're going to have French linemen put the line power in.
Yeah, you're infusing cash and training the native population to do those jobs. Mm-hmm. And that is, well, go on, Mike.
Oh, when she talked about Puerto Rico, that was so interesting because I was around for that disaster, and I remember distinctly that they wanted foreign, being American, outside of Puerto Rico, which Puerto Rico is part of America, but they wanted electricians from outside of Puerto Rico to go in and rebuild their electrical grid, but they didn't want to pay anything, and they didn't want to make it volunteer work. So they made it very undesirable for us to go. I think it was like, $17 an hour or something for a journeyman to go down there. It's like, are you fucking joking me? And they wanted us to pay ourselves. I remember the IBW union, or their business associate, went around and tried to get guys to go down there and work for like $17 an hour. And then you had to pay for everything off of that. Like, it was a joke. It was almost, in my opinion, after reading this, it was set up in such a way to where they could not actually do the rebuilding through normal means, right? Yeah. They had to get foreigners to come in and do it, like actual foreign labor from South America and whatnot. Like, they couldn't get Americans to do that work because they just refused to pay to have it done by us, Like, who the hell can afford to go from, let's say, Washington State, where you're making $60 an hour, travel to Puerto Rico on your own dollar, somehow find housing on your own, and then work for $17 an hour. Like, that's just not going to happen, right?
Yeah, for
and then economically, you're hurt twice because you still have to pay taxes on that. It's not volunteer work, so it's not a deduction, right? Like, they discouraged it in every way imaginable.
Oh, yeah.
So they did the same thing to Puerto Rico that they did to New Orleans, for that matter.
Yeah. There's a lot of details that we're just not getting into because it would make this a much longer episode than our cigar is long.
Well, we can't get into the specifics of everything.
Well, that's true, and this is kind of a, if you're intrigued by what we're talking about, definitely check out the book. If you're confused about kind of the state of the world as it is now and how a international or global pandemic can make the most wealthy even wealthier by something like 700%. This is a good book to read. I did want to mention, because I read a counterpoint, I don't know if it was really a counterpoint, maybe a critique of the book, and Mike read something else, he said. I can briefly talk about mine, and it was some professor at a college or some such thing. And it was a very brief article, but it was one of the few that I could find that wasn't on the Cato Institute's website. So I felt like perhaps... sorry, go ahead, Mike.
What are the odds that professor is actually a member of the Cato Institute? Because I get Cato Institute emails from when I was in college. So I had a friend who was a hyper-capitalist libertarian, and he was a fan of the Cato Institute. Coincidentally, he was also a big fan of the Soviet Union coming back.
Okay.
Yeah, he thought that the bipolar world was a better world for us economically.
And you know what? I mean, Naomi Klein did kind of make that inference, right? Where once communism fell, air quotes, that there was nothing left for capitalism to compete against except itself. And that's kind of where Milton Friedman and company all kind of came from with, corporations are where it's at. Even though she was kind of, I feel like she was a little pro-socialist, in the later chapters there, at least in the conclusion. But yeah, I mean, the point is that there's this professor that wrote kind of a very short, very brief kind of rebuttal of the shock doctrine. And basically he was saying something along the lines of the 6 things I chose to look at, she was accurate 100% in one of them, and in 2 of them she was moderately accurate, and in the rest of them she was not accurate. And I was kind of like, well, I don't know who you are and what your credentials are, or who you're backed by or sponsored by, or where your grants are coming from. That's not to say that I liked everything Naomi was talking about, or agreed necessarily with everything she was talking about, or bought it all hook, line, and sinker, but it's not really that kind of book to say you need to buy into this. I felt like she did a good job until she was talking about maybe some of the Republican Christians who were so excited about the rapture that they didn't care about much else, which I thought was funny, because I feel the same way. I feel the same way, right? But if I were writing a book like that, I don't know that I'd put that in there. You know what I mean? Like, you have to have a little bit of professional distance, I think, to be taken seriously with the broadest number of readers.
Right.
And you can definitely say, like, George W. Bush set things in motion that are detrimental to the rest of us now, without also kind of slamming them for their faith. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it plays a role, and I've had this conversation with people before where it's like, if you bring your religion into politics, expect your religion to be attacked as a political ideology. Yeah. Right. So if it's a key part of your political stance, then expect me to attack your religion.
Yes.
Abortion comes to mind, because that's going to be a hot button issue this cycle, I'm sure. If you're using a religious argument to say that something should or should not happen in the government, then expect people to attack your religion as illegitimate. So, not that I'm defending her, because I did previously mention that I thought she was a little shit libby with some of her attitudes with attacking Republicans and not also attacking, for example, the Clintons and their role in screwing over Russia. She, of course, didn't know what would happen in Russia after she wrote the book. But let's just say that we have Vladimir Putin now because of the actions of the United States.
Yeah, for sure. No, I agree with you, Mike. Like, she was overly critical of Republicans and less so of Democrats, liberals. She's also Canadian, so I don't know if that played a part. I mean, it's good to have the outside kind of perspective, but like a near neighbor, you know what I mean? I think so. I don't know. I feel that if you're in any country other than America, you're not really watching Fox News. Like, I think that's, so I feel like most other countries are, they feel like being liberal is more moderate in their countries or their minds. And the people that we call conservatives or Republicans maybe are very drastic to what they have in their countries. Comparatively speaking, I don't know for sure. I don't live there. I don't pay attention to a lot of that stuff from other countries. But I noticed what you noticed, where she was very kind of hypercritical of Republicans and less critical of Democrats in the American U.S. system.
Yes. And we've established, everybody knows I don't view those two groups as being fundamentally different. So...
Yeah, me either. I mean, our whole political compass episode from last season, they're 1 or 2 points away from each other in the same quadrant. So it's not like it's a big difference.
No, and I don't think Haiti happened yet when she wrote the book. That would have been interesting to see.
Yeah.
A chapter about Haiti because the Clintons totally took advantage of that situation. They are exactly the same merchants of death
for sure.
as Dick Cheney and George Bush
Rumsfeld
and
blah,
Rumsfeld
blah, blah.
and the senior Bush.
You said you didn't read the article I sent, which I just briefly talked about, but you read something else. What was the something else you read, Mike?
I read a novella that she wrote, and I will come up with the name here, the title, so that everybody knows.
Wasn't it?
Yeah, Battle for Paradise. And it was about the reaction to the hurricane that hit because they lost a massive amount of infrastructure. And it just went through
Katrina?
No, Katrina was in New Orleans.
It was in Shock Doctrine. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. This is a different hurricane. I can't remember what it's called. But basically, they tried to screw over Puerto Rico the same way that they screw over everywhere where there's a disaster. And she covered some of the resistance to it, because by that point, the people in Puerto Rico had seen what they did in New Orleans, which is still not recovered, and had seen what they did in Afghanistan and saw what they did in Iraq. So there's a lot more resistance from, example, the teachers and the local government people to privatization of schools and things like that. But the government of Puerto Rico, I guess, did some crazy tax incentives to where rich people didn't have to pay income tax if they moved to Puerto Rico. So apparently they were stealing, using the government's force to take land that had been otherwise abandoned because of the hurricane damage, and rich people were building houses on it and such. Kind of what they're doing in Maui right now for everybody should be aware.
You mean what Oprah is doing in Maui?
Yeah. What's happening in Maui under the Biden administration is exactly what they tried to do in Puerto Rico.
Yeah, and she mentioned this and the same thing with some of the tsunamis, where one of the tsunamis, they wanted to clear the riffraff fishermen people that actually drove the economy out of the beach and keep the resorts and, high-end things. And it worked in one country, but the other country they tried it in took notes from the previous country. And I think maybe that's the thing is with the age of information and the internet, you can be more aware of these things that are going on if you do your research and you do solid research. Not looking up. And it was nice. She had a little chapter on conspiracy theories where she was like, no conspiracy needed.
Right. And that's what made me think of the George Carlin thing. They don't need a conspiracy. The people who are the political elite across the globe all know each other. They went to the same schools. They're in the same clubs, right? They're going
their kids are in the same scout troop in the same school plays. They all network with one another.
Exactly. And what's good for Justin Trudeau is going to be good for Hunter Biden, which is going to be good for Don Jr.
Real quick, I don't know if we want to get into this right now, but have you seen the thing where people are saying Justin Trudeau is the bastard child of Fidel Castro?
Yes, I have. There's no evidence for that.
There's no evidence other than the pictures look very familiar. But again, with how many people are on the planet right now, everybody has a doppelganger. You know what I mean? A lot of people will look like you. And when you're a child, you look like a lot of people, I guess.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like Rafael Cruz's father assassinated JFK, right? I don't know if you heard that conspiracy or not.
I haven't, but I don't know that I don't necessarily lend much credence to any of those kind of things, but it's interesting because, like you said and George Carlin said, is all these people know each other. There's pictures of Trudeau's mother with Fidel Castro. You know what I mean? Just like there's pictures of a lot of people, I can't name any names, but a lot of people with Epstein and Maxwell. So
yes,
it doesn't necessarily prove anything, but they all know each other is the point.
They all know each other. It's just like John Kerry married a Hines, right?
Yep.
Is that a coincidence? I don't think so. And what was it? John McCain married a Bush of Anheuser-Busch fame, right?
Yeah.
Like, is it a coincidence that one of the most powerful senators in the country happened to be part of a major business dynasty? I don't think so.
Mike, I wish you'd leave the Bene Gesserit alone. Okay, like they're trying to create the perfect human. I don't know why you're fighting them on this.
Right, like people. Well, sci-fi is a great way to explore those concepts because, Frank Herbert saw what was happening even back then and described it perfectly, but in a foreign.
I mean, I guess that's the most depressing thing, right? Is I'm older than 17. And this book is 17 years old, and they're talking about a lot of things that happened, let's say 20 years before I was even born, or 10 years, or whatever it was before I was born, and nothing has changed. And if anything, it's only gotten worse. Even if you don't believe everything she's talking about, you can't deny that the rich have gotten richer. And we've been living through, like, you've seen those memes, right? Where, like, the millennials or whatever they call our generation, I don't know that I necessarily want to call myself a millennial, but
you're a millennial. We are actually the definitive millennial. Okay. We're like the middle of the group.
The OG.
We are dead set right in the center.
Yeah.
Like, we actually are a subgroup within the millennials.
We've lived through two major economic recessions and wars and a pandemic, and we're not even 40 yet, and it's, I don't know, like some of that stuff to me is, well, our generation was really the first generation that had the internet almost our whole life, definitely our adult life. We've had the internet, but we don't really have tweets from the JFK era. You know what I mean? So is it easy to go back and say, like, we actually lived through more than everybody else did? I mean, it feels like. Or did the greatest generation or the World War II vets or the Vietnam generation, did they just not complain as much? Did they not have an outlet for their thoughts? Did they keep it all in? Did they live through more than we did? Who knows? I don't know. It's tough you can't really compare other than it feels like, I don't know, my kind of attitude now is like, well, what's next? Like we did the Corona thing. Like, what's next?
What's next is we're going to have a very ancient president who is clearly not going to be the one in charge.
Jesus
and
Christ.
These
it doesn't matter
pigs,
which one wins. It doesn't matter which one wins.
I am
Both
not
of them
being
are going to be
specific
ancient.
about who's going to win because it's going to be the same story, right? The person who's supposed to be in charge is not going to be capable of actually being in charge. Which means
by design, I think.
This is by design. The war pigs who control all the corporations are going to be in control of every government department, just like they were for the past how many ever years.
Since Reagan, right?
Damn bit of difference. Oh, for sure.
Maybe
Since
even
Reagan.
Beyond that. Maybe even further back than that,
Well, the best part about the first Bush was that he was one of the war pigs. So at least he was most likely legitimately in control, whereas Reagan was just a fucking actor who had the war pig was the second in command, right?
Yeah.
The second Bush was also a war pig, but his second in command was like literally the reincarnation of death, like he was
Satan 2.0,
Yeah, he's like apocalyptic. Dick Cheney's so evil that a heart of a swine rejected his body and an evil scientist had to put a robot heart in him to keep him alive.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like no bueno, dude.
Hey man, I think you're being a little unfair to the Republicans here. I'm just fucking with you.
Bill Clinton was just like a crony of the pigs, right? He wasn't like one of them. And same thing with Obama.
He wanted to be. He wanted to be. They both wanted to be. And more bombs were dropped under Obama's administration than Bush's.
Right. Oh, Obama totally let the gods of war take over. He just...
Well, and why shouldn't he? It makes money for all the people that pay your campaign bills.
Right. Yeah. He wasn't one of the elite inner circle, but he took their money and allowed them to run the show and became a pleasant face for the evil machine. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like that was his job, was to put a positive spin on the heart of darkness.
Yep.
And his second in command, our current president, is one of the war pigs. I mean, he legit is like long-term business interest in the munitions industries and like all that stuff.
When he remembers, but yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I want to tell you a quick story. And this was back when I was in high school. And my graduating class in high school was 89 people. Very, very small town, and mostly hunters. School was canceled the week in November that hunting was open for white-tailed deer. And that was just a given. Like, you're not going to school that week or the week and a half, whatever it was. And in our, I'm trying to remember the name of it. What is it called, Mike, when you go and you learn about like social studies, I think? Social studies. And our teacher was asking, what does every single American president have in common? And I was the only one to speak up. And I said, they're a white man. And he was like, yep, exactly right. And this is high school, so we weren't going to, I don't think he was intending to go into the white rich man from a political dynasty with backing of corporations and blah, 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 blah. And so I feel like Barack Obama was allowed, I'll say allowed to be president, to try and break that stigma a little bit so that, people would think they won and they'd stop worrying about getting somebody truly different in there in the office. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but I remember that distinctly.
How do I say this without being rude or sounding bad? Barack Obama was the DEI president. The DEI is not about including people who are different. It's about putting a pretty face on the same old machinery that's doing bad things. It's not about making things better. It's about keeping things the same. You know what I mean? And making it look on the surface different, but in reality, it's the same thing. There's been no change. Meet the new boss, same as the old boss. Now the new boss, it's
the like, king is dead. Long live the king.
Right. The current press secretary they like to bill her as a black lesbian immigrant. But she's still just as bad as any of the other press secretaries. She's still covering up lies.
Oh, for sure. Doing
all the horrible things. Also, she's an immigrant from France. They throw the immigrant label on her, but she's not an immigrant from a poor country. No. She went to elite schools in a elite country.
Yeah.
It's...
And even if you are, Jimmy Stewart did this back in the day, right? Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Once you're there, do you have all of the financial motivations to keep the status quo?
Oh, absolutely. There's a reason why members of Congress have better stock market performance than any other subgroup in the country.
Yeah.
Right. It's not a coincidence. And even the people who were, quote unquote, outsiders, like the one-eyed congressman from Texas, Dan Crenshaw, he vehemently defends his right to trade on the stock market because how else can he become wealthy and successful unless he can use insider information on the stock market?
Yeah.
And he says it out loud. Like, that's just his position.
If you heard of this, Mike, there's a Nancy Pelosi index. Somebody created a script for stock trading that matches what Nancy Pelosi does.
Yes.
I don't want to get too much into that because my fingers are burning on this cigar. I don't know what you have left.
I have more than you, but mine's going out.
Okay. Let's do final thoughts on the book, and then let's do final thoughts on the cigar.
Okay. My final thoughts on the book it ties in with the Chaos book about Charles Manson and MK Ultra we read. It ties in with the JFK book. It ties in with Economic Hitman. There's a trend with these exploratory books that talk about government policy.
Yes, and it's a lot of the same corporate players, I would say.
It's a lot of the same actors who are not very good people, I would say, overall. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Yep. I guess I gave it a 4 out of 5 on Goodreads. I wanted to give it a 5 out of 5, but for the same reasons you were mentioning, she was overly critical of one political party versus the other. And she didn't have to, but she brought in kind of the Revelation end of times people. You know what I mean? The Revelation Christians, which I thought was hilarious because that's what I grew up with. And I thought it was like on the nose. But as an objective reader, right, as an objective person, I felt that it was uncalled for in the grand scope of the book. Like, I felt that was a bit of a detractor from her book, actually, because that didn't even need to be said.
It didn't, but in context of 2007, that was a hot topic.
Yeah, I understand that. I'm not saying it wasn't. I'm not saying it's not accurate or true. I'm just saying it was kind of a detractor for me, even though I enjoyed it. But I enjoyed it, and then I thought, in the grand scheme of the book, though, and trying to remain... Not that she's trying to remain unbiased, but, as an objective observer or fact collector presenting what she has found, I felt it kind of undermined her data. Yeah.
She should have been more aggressive towards the other side of the scheme. Or their they're not even the other side. The other members of the scheme.
Yeah, the other participants. So I think it's a worthwhile book, and this is what I told my wife's siblings when they were down for Christmas a couple months ago. I said, look, if you want to understand the state of America and the state of the world, read Confessions of an Economic Hitman, read Shock Doctrine, and read The Real Anthony Fauci. And you don't have to believe them at face value. You don't have to. But reading all three of those books together, you start to see enough similarities where you're like, these three people probably have never, ever been in the same room together or talked to one another. And they're all saying the same thing. So, or similar things.
They're describing the same thing from different points of view.
Yes.
So, cigar, I thought it was good. I'm surprised. I was
surprisingly like this one. I didn't really have much expectation. I didn't have any negative expectation towards it either, but this one was I really enjoyed this one. It was sweet for sure, but I didn't feel it was overly sweet to the point that I wanted to stop smoking. It was a good balance of sweet.
Yeah, I'm impressed. Especially for the price. I think I got this one for like $2.50. Yeah. On sale, of course, everybody.
I mean, I've seen these in the Pipes and Cigars magazines and stuff. I flip through, and I'm like, Factory Smokes. I wonder if those are good. And,
yes,
they're always dirt cheap. They're dirt cheap all the time.
Yeah. I ordered a very large order from Cigars Daily, which they came very well packaged with Humi packs and sealed in baggies and in proper packaging. I was really impressed with the packaging from Cigars Daily. Not a sponsor. And they do have a YouTube channel, so if anybody wants to go watch them, feel free. But yeah, no, I thought it was good.
Yeah, I'd say, if you like a little sweeter smoke, this one is great. This one's fantastic. Even if you like I did, I had a gift card for a local cigar shop, and I went in and they were asking me, they're like, hey, do you need any help? And I'm like, not really. I've got, money to spend because I got a gift card and whatever. And they said, oh, what do you like to normally smoke? And I told them, like, oh, you're a full-bodied, like dark cigar kind of guy. And I'm like, yeah, I guess, and Mike's called me out on that on previous episodes.
Okay.
Yeah, and and so, but basically, I ended up getting a couple cigars. I think four cigars that were within my wheelhouse. And then I told the guy, I'm like, look, man, like, this was the same guy that recommended us that Christoph, Connecticut. I said, look, I was in here a couple months ago and you recommended that Christoph, Connecticut. It was fantastic and I liked it. Recommend me something I wouldn't normally smoke. And he recommended me something I wouldn't normally smoke. Not that I wouldn't normally smoke it. I'm a co-host on a cigar podcast after all. I'll smoke whatever, even the fucking Underground Shade and the Cult Blood Red Moon. But but I like the Moon Trance, okay? And I like this one. So if you like something that's lighter and sweeter, then this one is fantastic. I really enjoyed this one. I really did.
I was pleasantly surprised, especially at the price point.
Yeah.
So highly,
yes.
It's a recommend for sure.
Yeah. Totally. Check out our Patreon, our website, and tune in next week. We've got 2 co-hosts from Midwest Shenanigans. They're going to join us next week. We're going to talk about who knows what. I don't know what. But they've got their own podcast. Check them out before you listen to our episode. We're going to have them on. We're going to talk about things. Who knows what that may end up being. But we're both excited to have them on. And we're very excited to be back for season 3.
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks for listening. Let's just talk over itself. We've done this for 3 seasons, Mike. What are we doing?
My
All right,
timing
peace out.
is terrible.